Hey guys, welcome back to more custom card reviews. Today we're going to be checking out your discard cards. As always, a big shout out to DrewBerry who sets up these challenges. Check out his channel for his top five. We're going to be delving into the best of the rest. So let's look at my top 10. Now, firstly, we're going to look at my own design. As always, I don't give myself any scores for these, but it's just a chance for me to delve into a card and do the challenge myself. So my design was Bullseye, a 1/1. With the on reveal effect, select a random card in hand as the target. And what that means is when a card in your hand is the target, anytime you play any discard cards, instead of a different card being discarded, the target will be discarded. And then the final effect on the Bullseye card is this returns to your hand at the start of each turn. So it's similar to Kitty in that you can play it each turn, changing which card in your hand is the target. The idea behind this was to try and give you some kind of targeted discard. So there was lots of card ideas that were being posted in the Berryverse Discord, trying to find ways to target discarding better. And some of them were saying things like, when you play this card, choose a card to discard, but the game doesn't really work that way, right? When you've chosen to play a card, the cards then reveal and the players have no agency to click on cards in their hand or select things. So this was my attempt at trying to give some kind of agency to discard where you'd know each turn what you would be discarding. Now it's a bit wordy. I think the text could be tidied up a bit, but the idea here is that you'd paid Bullseye on turn one. It would select the card in your hand that would be the discard. So say it was Wolverine. And then next turn, you knew that if you discarded a card, it would be Wolverine, and you'd be happy to play your standard discard cards out like you would normally. And the benefit of this is you can do things like Hela. You'd never be worried about accidentally discarding your Hela. You can play cards like Gambit and Moon Knight, who discard random cards from your hand but have other positive effects like making the enemy discard or destroying a card. And on top of this, it has the same synergies as Kitty, right? So you can play it really well with Angela or other cards that trigger well when you're playing cards repeatedly to the board. So it was, I think the text, like I say, needs a bit of tidying up. But the idea behind this was having a card where you could target which cards in your hand would be triggered by a random discard effect. And I think as we go through my top 10, you'll see there's a few more ideas here from other people that have done this in probably a bit of a smoother and nicer way. So let's dive into the top 10. Okay, my card number 10 is a card designed by Pom with 3 M's. And it is Zeus with the on reveal effect. Add a lightning to your opponent's deck. And lightning says when you draw this, discard it. Your energy decreases by 1 this turn. So we can see here that Zeus is a 2/3 and lightning is a 0/0. So lightning is almost like a rock, right? You can think of this similar to Korg, where you play this card, it puts something in your opponent's deck, so it's a dead draw for them. What this is also doing though is when they draw this lightning, if they draw the lightning, not only is it a dead draw for them, it will discard and it will give them -1 energy this turn. And what I really liked about this is I thought this was really fun theming. You know, Zeus is a character, throws around thunderbolts, and I thought this could have really fun animation when your opponent drew the lightning from the deck. Maybe a strike of lightning comes down, destroys the card, etc. This works really well with something like Stature, which needs your opponent to have discarded a card. And obviously, you're adding stuff to the opponent's deck, so it works well with Darkhawk. So I thought that was really fun. Um, I did have a slight worry that it may be slightly too strong in that it's giving your opponent two negative effects. So not only are you cutting them off from a draw, which we know is massive, but also you're giving them -1 energy on the turn that they don't get the draw. I think it's balanced a little bit by this being a 2 cost versus Korg being a 1 cost, but I thought it was a fun design, really good. Well done, Pom. I think it's a well worthy card number 10 in my list. So, card number 9 is a card designed by Zabati Bopper. Hopefully, I've said that right. And it's a 1/2 swordsman with the on reveal effect. If your opponent doesn't play a card here next turn, discard the highest cost card from their hand. Now, I like this because it's a card that gives your opponent a decision to make, right? Do they play into the card and therefore prevent this discard? They'll know what cards they have in their hands, so they know if they want to discard it or not. But then there might be reasons that they want to play to other locations in the board, right? There might be location effects. They might have an Angela down in another path. Um, so this works really well with things like Gamora and the other Guardians because you can almost force your opponent to play a card to that location. Obviously, they can decide not to and end up with the card discard. As the previous card we looked at, it's really good synergy with stature because there's a good chance that the opponent might end up discarding a card if they don't play into that lane. And by forcing your opponent to play into a certain lane, or at least encouraging them to, you've got synergies with things like Professor X, right? Because if they end up playing into this lane, you could Professor X a different lane and get that lockdown. My concern was that this might be slightly too strong as it is, because forcing your opponent to play into one specific lane or discarding the highest cost card may be a little bit of a strong effect. So an idea I had was that it might be better if it's better if your opponent um the effect triggers if your opponent does play a card there. So what you're actually doing is encouraging them not to play a card in a specific location. And then again, you have the same synergies, right? You could then Professor Exit next turn, or they'd have to make the call to play a card there and discard their highest cost card from their hand. Either way, I thought it was really fun. I love cards like this where you're giving the players more decisions to make as the game goes on, right? You're adding complexity to the game. It's making the players think about what they're going to do on their next turn. So I thought this was fun. The theming was good with Swordsman. You can imagine him sort of cutting through the card if they play there. So yeah, well done. Great design. Thanks. So card number 8 is a card designed by Ethan, and this is Icarus or Icarus. I'm not familiar with this character. Ongoing, this card gains the combined power of all discarded cards. Destroy this card if its power exceeds 12, and it's a 4/0. Now, I thought this was really fun because of this second part of the ability, right? Discard this card if its power exceeds 12. So then you've got this weird mini quest that you're playing that you want to discard cards from your hand. You don't want to exceed 12, but you probably want to get as close to 12 as possible to make it worthwhile. I thought that was just a really fun design that's not really anything we've seen before. Generally, you want to really discard your high cost cards with things like Hela, or just discard lower cost cards just to make it less of an impact to your strategy. So yeah, I thought this was fun. Obviously, a key synergy would be armor. If you put this in an armor lane, then it's just going to have the combined power of all cards you've discarded, regardless of how many they are. And that's might be a bit broken, but it is a two-card combo, not necessarily the easiest to pull off. With this and something like Modoc, it could be a little bit broken, maybe. Obviously, cards like Lady Sif are good because you're going to want to be discarding probably your highest cost cards. They're going to have the highest power. It might even be something that you would fit this into a deck without other discard cards, right? It could just be that if, with a combination of Lady Sif and Icarus, if you discarded a card that was 12 power, then you're playing a 4/12, uh, which is just really above rate and really good value. And you could combine that with something like Mystique to then double up that effect as well. So yeah, I thought this was quite fun. Maybe slightly broken with armor, but cool design. Something we haven't seen. So well done, Ethan. Great design. Card number 7 is a card designed by Max Beam 16, and this is Hellstrom. And he's done 3 pieces of art here. They look great. I've given it a 5-star for artwork. Love the frame break. Love the logo. It's really good. And Hellstrom is a 3/3 ongoing. After you discard a card from your hand, add a demon to your hand and set its cost equal to the card discarded. Now, I really like this idea. This could have been higher in the list. I think why I like it is this is really encouraging you to discard low cost cards from your hand. And that's not really something that we see in the game at the moment, right? There's a reason to discard cards that work well with discard, like X-23 and Wolverine. There's a reason to discard your sort of higher cost cards, higher power cards to bring them back with Hela. There's not really too much of a reason to discard your low cost cards. So if you discard, a 0 power card, a 1 power card, cost 0 cost card, 1 cost card with this, that means on the last turn of the game you could be playing a 0 power demon and a 1 power demon, right? And remember, demons are 6 power each. Um, 0 cost demon and 1 cost demon, and they're 6 power each, so that's a huge swing. If you could fill your hand with really low cost cards, so zeros, ones, twos, and then Modoc on turn 5, turn 6 is going to be a huge blowout because you're going to be able to play maybe up to sort of 5 or 6 cards, and they're going to be 6 power each. That's going to be huge amounts of power. You could combine this with something like Patriot, because Patriot's obviously going to buff up the demons because they've got no ability. As I said, it works well. I've said here it works well with X-23 and Wolverine, both being low cost cards that you want to discard. So I think this is really fun. I think it's a completely new discard deck building design. Great work, Max Beam. I think I could definitely see something like this in the game. Okay, we're on to card number 6. This is a card designed by 5 shillings, and he's given us Baron Zemo, who is a 3/1. At the end of each turn, whoever's losing this location discards a card from their hand. Now, I thought this was quite fun. Again, it's a little mini quest, right? It's giving players more to think about during the game. I thought the recost was pretty ideal for this because realistically, if you play Baron Zemo on turn 3, that's a discard on turn 4, at the end of turn 4, a discard at the end of turn 5, and then turn 6 doesn't really matter because if you discard a card at the end of your turn at turn 6, generally it's irrelevant unless you're, doing something with Dracula or Apocalypse. So you're talking maybe 2 or 3 discards. You could build your deck around it so you didn't mind discarding cards. It's encouraging the opponent to play into a specific location, and then you can benefit things like Professor X and the Guardians for stuff like that, which is always fun. If the opponent's discarding cards, you could again use Stature, which gets obviously reduced down to a 1 cost if the opponent has discarded a card this game. And I put Swarm in here because this is just a representation of a card that you wouldn't mind discarding from your hand. So you could build out your hand with cards that you are happy to discard, force the opponent to have to play into this lane or compete with you in this lane, possibly discard a few of their cards, be able to play cheap Stature. So yeah, a fun idea. Didn't think it was too broken. I think, like I say, an extra 2 or 3 discards in the game, giving the players something else to think about where they play their cards. Really good fun. So great design, 5 shilling. So let's dive into the top 5. And at 5, we had a card design by Leo CD. This is Dark Beast, who's a 2/5 with the on reveal ability. Return your other cards. This should say cards at this location to your hand and then discard them. Now, this one I probably could have put higher because I really, really like the idea of this card. First off, theming, it's a great design. Dark Beast, I wasn't familiar with the character. I've looked him up. He's from an alternative dimension and basically an evil version of Beast. What does Beast do in the game? Beast bounces cards back to your hand. What does Dark Beast do? He bounces cards back to your hand and then discards them. So I thought great synergy. I think it's probably a little bit stronger to 2/5 because you play this into an empty lane, say on turn 2. 2/5 is a great stat line, probably a little bit overpowered because you quite easy to do that and have no downside. So maybe I could see this as a 2/3 or 2/4. What I really like about this though is that it gives you a way, and we don't have a way to do this before, to discard cards multiple times. And when I say discard cards, I mean cards like X-23 and Wolverine. So if you're building a discard deck and you put something like X-23 or Wolverine in there, you trigger their discard, it plays into the board, it's really useful. That's it, you can never get that effect again. Unlike Destroy, where you play X-23 to the board, you can destroy it over and over and over again and keep triggering that ability. With Dark Beast, it gives you a way to trigger Wolverine and X-23 multiple times. So you could discard X-23 from your hand using a different card. It's on the board, play Dark Beast to that lane, it's pulling it back to your hand, discarding it again. And again, this is great with things like the Collector, like normal Beast, because it is bouncing them back to your hand, so that's going to buff up the Collector. It's going to be great with Mobius, because you're getting multiple discards out of it. So I thought, fun card, really good design, maybe slightly overtuned at a 2/5, but then that being said, as the game goes on, you're probably less likely to want to play it into a lane and bounce cards back, so maybe it'll be okay. Great theming, really like this card. Well done, Leo CD, one of my favorites. Okay, card number 4 is a card designed by Van der Lord, and this is Hannibal King, who's a 3/3. His text says he cannot be played at the middle location. Each turn, discard 1 card from one side of your hand, depending on the location of this card. Now, the reason that I put this at number 4, I think the text is maybe a bit wordy and I'm not sure on the balance, but I really liked the creative aspect of being able to decide which cards you were going to end up discarding from your hand, whether it would be a card on the left or a card on the right, based on where you play this card. Now, I put here in my notes, it may possibly be better instead of something that triggers every turn to just be a one turn thing, maybe for a reduced cost. So what you could do is you could say if you play this in the left lane, it discards your leftmost card. If you play this in the right lane, it discards your rightmost card. But We don't have that much in the way of targeted discard. Obviously, there are things that discard your highest cost and your lowest cost. And with Blades rework, it obviously allows you to target a bit more. But having a card that lets you pick between two in your hand that you want to discard, I thought was really fun, really creative. And obviously, it works well with any cards that need discarding. Apocalypse generally tends to go to your right of your hand anyway, because when it gets destroyed and brought back, it ends up on the right. X-23 is a card that you always want to sort of targeted discard. And Hela is a card that you never want to discard, right? So with a card like this, because you can choose which card you're discarding when you play it, I thought it was fun and obviously works well in Hela decks. So well done, Vandalord. An interesting idea. I'm not sure on the balance of it because obviously we've seen a card a little bit like this before in uh Quake, where you play her depends on what she does, and she doesn't see much use because it can be fiddly to play it to the right location on the board. But that being said, I thought it was a creative way to get around the targeted discard problem. So well done, and I thought it was a fun, creative design. Okay, let's go into our top three. And for me, number three was a card designed by Right Hand L. This is Nicholas Scratch, who's a 1/0. At the start of each turn, discard a card to gain 2 power. Now, you might see here that my first note on this card was I was unsure if it was too strong or just completely terrible. But I think it's quite fun. I think it's quite good, and I think it's an interesting deck build, right? If you can get this card down on turn one, you're discarding a card every turn, which is a huge downside generally. But then you'd build your card, your deck around that, right? You'd want swarms in your deck, which would be great because that would be refilling your hand. You'd probably want cards that put more cards into your hand. Agent Coulson, for example, there we go, or Nick Fury. I mean, they're all like adding extra cards to your hand that Nicholas Stratch could be discarding, but it still gives you more options. Obviously, you'll want cards like Apocalypse and Wolverine. I've put Hela in here. Hela's very likely to get discarded, but if you're discarding a card every turn, so you're talking turn two, turn three, turn four, turn five. Um, if you can get Hela down on turn six, you're pulling a lot of cards back. But Hela will probably be discarded, knowing Hela in discard decks. I thought this was fun. If you do play it on turn one, it getting +2 power every turn ends up at 12 power by turn six. That is pretty strong, but it's obviously a huge downside to be discarding every turn. It's got lots of vulnerabilities with things like Killmonger, with things like Shang-Chi, with things like Shadow King. That being said, I liked it because it's pretty simple, but a whole new way of playing a deck and playing discard that hasn't been done before, and you'd have to build it out in a very specific way. So really nice design, right hand elf, well done. So we're into our number two. This is a card designed by Randall Boggs, and it is Ares. And before we delve into the ability, I just wanted to show off this really, really nice artwork that they've come out with here. All frame broken, custom text, beautiful. If there was a 6-star for artwork, I definitely would have given it. I've shown the 5 artworks that they shared in the Discord here. So the text is it's a 4/6. Before we dive into text, so it's on reveal. The rightmost card from each player's hand bites. Discard the weaker one. Now, this is an ability that's pulled from the location Warrior Falls, which you might be familiar with. So in Warrior Falls, the cards there bite. And what that means is whichever card has the lowest power gets destroyed. In this case, it's doing that same effect, but it's doing it for the rightmost card in each player's hand. So it'll be the one that's been drawn most recently. And the one that loses, i.e., the one that has the least power, is getting discarded. Now, this is fun. I think it's just a fun card because when this triggers, for one thing, you're going to get the information because I think the way this was designed was that both players see this fight happen. So both players see which card has been discarded and which card the other player has that wasn't discarded. So that's interesting in itself. It's really good with cards like Apocalypse because Apocalypse has huge power, so is likely to win. And if it gets discarded, then it's no downside, right? It's good for the person who discards Apocalypse. Stature again is a great card with Ares because if this is triggering and it does discard the opponent's card, then obviously Stature becomes a 1 cost. And Ghost Rider is a great synergy here because if you end up discarding one of your cards because the opponent have more power, not only do you then know what that card is, which is always useful, you could play Ghost Rider to pull that card back onto the board. And that might be a 5 or 6 power card, so that could be really good value for Ghost Rider. I think also the reason that I gave this such a high score, theming wise, huge 5 stars, because Ares is obviously the god of war, and this is triggering 2 cards to fight, discarding the lowest one. I thought brilliant theming. So well done. I thought it was quite balanced, very creative. You can see here 5 stars across the board. Could have been my number one. Well done, Randall Boggs, but we will move on to my number one. And although it hasn't got quite as much in the way of stars, the reason I really like this card was for its pure simplicity, how just I could see this being very useful, really sort of on first glance a simple ability, but I think it just adds so much to the discard archetype. This is a card by LXUM. It's Abraham Whistler, who is Blade's mentor in the film, so you might remember. He's currently a 2/3 with the on reveal, return the last card you discarded to your hand. Now, I'm really surprised that this isn't in the game. How many times have you played Discord? You've played cards like Gambit or any cards with a random discard ability, and you've lost your key synergy piece, and basically you just retreat because that's game over. You've lost the synergy. There's no way to sort of play out the game. You can't do what you were trying to do. I can't believe there's not a card like this in the game where it gives you a do-over, right? If you accidentally discard your Hela on turn 2 or 3, play Abraham Whistler, Hela comes back to your hand. You're good to go. Now, obviously, the opponent's going to see that Hela was discarded and then pulled back, so they're likely to retreat, but that's still cubes that you were getting. You're not having to retreat, so I still think it's good. I think it's just a perfect failsafe for you accidentally discarding your key cards. um, it makes discard more reliable, which is one of the main problems that discard has. I've put here that I could see this potentially being a 1 cost because I think the ability is not super strong. I think there are some really good 1 power cards in the game, and I think being able to pull back a card you've discarded back into your hand, it's not going onto the board, so you'd still have to pay the cost to play it. I could easily see that being a 1 cost ability, and I think this would be then a card that you would slot into a lot of discard decks. I just thought it was great. I've put Morbius as another synergy here because obviously you're getting the potential, or you're getting the upside of discarding a card by buffing up Morbius, and then you're getting it back in your hand. So potentially you can discard it again, or then you can play it to the board, etc. But really nice. I loved its simplicity. I I think it's just so obvious that I can't believe it's not already in the game. So well done, LXUM. Really good design. Thanks very much for joining me. Hopefully, I'll do another one of these for the next card challenge. But as I said before, check out DrewBerry's top 5 cards for more cards with the discard synergy. And hopefully, I'll see you soon. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like or subscribing to my channel. Thanks very much, and hopefully, see you again soon.